As the first children of Illuvatar, the elves are the first and oldest species in Middle-earth. So little of their history is actually visible in the Lord of the Rings and the Hobbit trilogies. Characters like Legolas, Elrond and Thranduil appear, but with little backstory, when entire books can be written on elven history. Today on Fantasy Archive, we go over a summarized version of Arda's most famous royals and what they are famous for. Stay tuned while we will go through the different royal lines and share the highlights of the important who's and whats. First, let's understand some basic concepts on how elves are grouped. When the elves joined the Great March to Valinor, they segregated into different cultural groups. Those groups that eventually crossed to Aman and witnessed the light of the trees were known as High Elves or Light Elves. Those who did not were known as Dark Elves. Therefore, there are two ways to group elves. The first is by cultural group. What group was the elf born into? Either the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri. The second is the High Elf versus Dark Elf distinction. These groups are decided based on their relationship with the Valar and if they saw the light of the trees or not. So for example, the Avari, who refused to follow Orome to Valinor, are Dark Elves. They are considered the least wise and powerful. Meanwhile, the elves that actually got to Valinor and saw the light of the two trees are the High Elves. As a whole, High Elves are wiser and far more powerful than Dark Elves because they absorbed power from the light of the trees and learned from the Valar. The Dark Elf-High Elf difference basically runs on a spectrum because of some elves never joined the Great March to Valinor and some did but never finished the journey. This is relevant because it helps you distinguish how powerful an elf is and why some elves have powers that others don't. The three original elven kings were Ingwe, Fenwe, and Elwë. The first kings are the Vanyar, the Noldor, and the Teleri. All of them are considered high elves since they were the first three elves to accompany Orome to Valinor. Almost all royal elves that are royal by birth can trace their lineage back to either Finwë or Elwë, since not much is known of the Ingwe line. Our first royal line is Finwë's, the first High King of the Noldor. The Noldor are considered high elves. Finwë marries Miriel, who dies after giving birth to their only son Fëanor. Fëanor is a controversial character. His birth stands a testament to this. Miriel was so exhausted after his birth that she willfully departed from her body to Mandos. Fëanor was known for being the master smith who created the Silmarils. Now Fëanor was not very liked. He and his 7 sons acted out as if the end justifies the means, acting violently, including mass murder throughout the First Age. He was so infuriated by Melkor's axe that he was determined to go to Middle-earth to fight him. Many elves didn't support his acts and missions. Out of his 7 sons, only one survived and wandered away, never to be seen again. Ultimately, Fëanor had one surviving grandson, Celebrimbor, son of the most villainous Curufin. Celebrimbor, master craftsman who forged the 3 rings of power. Unlike his ancestors, Celebrimbor was not into violence and killing. He stood against the house of Fëanor and was the last surviving member of Fëanor's line until his death. He died tortured by Sauron in his pursuit of the Rings of Power during the War of the Elves and Sauron. Now King Finwë was the only elf to remarry. After Miriel's death, he marries King Ingwe's daughter, Indis of the Vanyar. The Vanyar elves were well known for their beautiful golden hair. Finwë and Indis have 2 sons, Fingolfin and Finarfin. After Fëanor was banished from Noldor, Finwë abdicated his throne and joined him. So Fingolfin became the High King of the Noldor. He has 2 sons, Fingon and Turgon. After Fingolfin's death, Fingon becomes the new High King, whose son is the famous Gil-galad. Turgon, Fingolfin's 2nd son, has a daughter, Indril Celebrindal. This means Indril, Celebrimbor, and Gil-galad are therefore Finwë's great-grandchildren. Indril is one among those of the Eldar that marries mortal men. It is from this marriage that Eärendil is born. Eärendil is a half-elf mariner, famous for many reasons. He married Elwing, granddaughter to Lúthien, the first elf to marry a mortal man. Eärendil is also known for receiving a Silmaril from Elwing and killing the dragon Ancalagon the Black during the War of Wrath. Eärendil and Elwing have twins, Elrond and Elros. Going back to Finwë's 3rd and youngest son, Finarfin, he was a laid-back but wise prince. He married Eärwen. Eärwen was a silver-haired princess and daughter of King Olwe, King Elwë's brother. Olwe becomes king when Elwë is lost in the woods. He continues and leads the Teleri to Valinor. Therefore the Teleri are High Elves as well. Some Teleri stayed behind to wait for Elwë, and they became known as the Sindar, and are Dark Elves. It is from the Sindar that great elven figures like Orofer, Thranduil, and Legolas descend. Now, as we were saying, Finarfin and Irwin get married and have 5 children. The most remarkable ones were the eldest son Finrod and his amazing sister Galadriel. Galadriel is the only surviving member of the House of Finwë. She is the last grandchild of Finwë and the last of her generation to play any sort of role in the Second Age. Galadriel is Noldor by father and Teleri by mother, hence her gold and silver hair. We see that all of the great elven legends of the First, Second, and Third Age are thus related. They are all branches of the same tree. Our second royal line is King Elwë. He, also known as Thingol, was the first king of the Teleri. At some point, while the elves march to Valinor, Elwë gets lost in the woods. There he meets MELIAN, a Maya who later becomes his wife. MELIAN is a demigod, who was unknowingly waiting for Elwë. For it was the will of Illuvatar that their only child, Luthien, married the mortal man Beren. The love story of Beren and Luthien was famous. The two lovers stole the Silmarils from Morgoth, got married, and had a son by the name of Dior. He was a blessed offspring with elven men and Maiar heritage in his blood, and the first of the half-elves also called Perendil. Dior married Nimloth, who gave birth to 3 children, a pair of twins, and a daughter called Elwing. Elwing inherits the Silmarils from her family and eventually marries Erendil, another half-elf, son of Indril and Tor, the second men-and-elf union after Luthien and Beren. Erendil and Elwing's children are the 2 half-elven twins, Elrond and Elros. When given the choice between being a mortal man or an elf, Elrond chooses to remain an elf, and Elros chooses man. Elros goes on to become the first king of Numenor. Elrond plays a pivotal role in the Second Age, and eventually marries Celebrian, daughter of Celeborn and Galadriel. From this marriage is born their daughter Arwen. Arwen marries Aragorn, the descendant of the kings of Arnor, consolidating the third love union of elf and men. Tens of thousands of years after Finwë and Elwë separated, the descendants finally joined. Almost everything revolves around the royal lines through all ages. With the union of Erendil and Elwing, the Noldor, the Sindar, and men come together. This was the ultimate plan of Ilúvatar.